So when it comes to teams that you wouldn't necessarily look at spending a lot of money in the offseason for MLB teams, the Orioles don't necessarily come to mind, but they can make moves when they feel like they need to. I mean, the mid-90s, they were notorious for spending because they had one of the highest payrolls in the league, but now that they've been toward the bottom, they've kind of been, I don't want to use the term smart with it, because basically what we're looking at in this video is the 10 worst free agent signings by the Baltimore Orioles since the year I was born in 1998. That's why I have it from 1998 up until 2024, because it's basically the 10 worst free agent signings they've made of my lifetime. There is one exception here. I'm not counting Orioles players who were on the team and got re-signed, so the Mark Trumbo contract and the Chris Davis contract will not be a part of this. These are strictly free agents that were on other teams, then entered free agency and signed with the Orioles with some sort of expectation only to not live up to it at all. Now, before we get to the list, I want to talk about one dishonorable mention, because this contract wasn't necessarily bad. It was just kind of, well, almost just disappointing more than it was bad, and that is in 1999 the Orioles decided to sign the former Cleveland Indians and Chicago White Sox slugger Albert Bell to a 5-year, $65 million deal. And in 1999 he was solid. He hit 37 homers, had 17 stolen bases, was looking, like Albert Bell. But problems in the clubhouse emerged, injuries started to pile up, and even though he was solid again in 2000, it was definitely down production from what we were used to. And the thing after that was he never returned to the Major League Baseball field again, being injured the last 3 years of that contract, sort of similar to like Jacoby Ellsbury on the Yankees, where he was still on the team while he was injured, but he never played because he could never get fully healthy. And that basically led to the end of Albert Bell's career. So that's why it's a dishonorable mention, because when he played well, but because he was, kind of a clubhouse cancer, and also, the whole injury thing, the Orioles spent a lot of money for 2 decent years, and that was about it. Now, getting into the list, at number 10, we have the names from the Orioles' 2004 spending spree. Now, obviously, they did make one good move during that spending spree, and that was bringing in former AL MVP Miguel Tejada, who spent 4 solid years with the Orioles, but they also had a couple of mistakes, which at number 10 and number 9, you're about to see what they are. But at number 10, we have the Orioles signing Javi Lopez to a 3-year deal worth $22.5 million. Now, I get it. Javi Lopez was a big name, and I understand in 2003 he was coming off a career year where he smacked 43 homers, but let's be honest, as an Oriole during his 3-year tenure, he wasn't fantastic. He was solid in 04, and in 05 dealt with a lot of injuries, but again, when he did play, he was fine. But by 06, all he could really do was be the designated hitter. He would be traded to the Red Sox later that year, not really do much, and then basically retired after that, never returning to the Major League field again. So that's why he's on here, is because not that anybody thought he would live up to his expectations from 2003. It's just he really only had 1 solid year, and then it was a bunch of injury-plagued seasons after that where he was just kind of decent, and the fact that he just couldn't catch it all after that was just kind of disappointing in itself. Which then leads us into number 9, a technical re-signing by the Orioles, and it happened in the same offseason that we're about to talk about, 2004, and that is the Orioles signing Sidney Ponson to a also 3-year deal worth $22.5 million. Sidney Ponson was an Oriole pitcher from 1998 to 2003 up to that point, and of course, like Javi Lopez, in 03, Sidney Ponson had a career year winning 17 games and having an ERA of 3.5, and he was traded from the Orioles to the Giants at the trade deadline that year because the Giants needed pitching help in the midst of a pennant race while the Orioles were out of it. But the Giants didn't end up re-signing Ponson, making him a free agent, so the Orioles thought, let's outsmart the Giants. We just traded him to them for prospects. Now, let's sign him back, because wouldn't that just be the funniest thing? Even though the Orioles knew before in 2003, Sidney Ponson was kind of a mediocre pitcher at best. So why they made this deal and decided to bring him back again, I don't know. He would end up being the ace in 04, going 11-15 with an ERA of 5.3, and then have an ERA of 6.5 in 2005, where the Orioles would then cut him. He would bounce around the league a little bit, but obviously never really did anything. To this day, this deal feels like it made no sense because, yes, he had a good year in 03, but it was his only good year, and the fact that you brought him back when there was probably better options on the market during 04 kind of makes me wonder what could have been. At number 8, this is kind of an interesting one, but we have Jay Payton in 2007 signing a 2-year, $9.75 million deal to be the Orioles' center fielder, left fielder. At least I think he started out as a center fielder, but then when the Orioles got Adam Jones in the trade with the Mariners in 2008, Payton moved over to left. Jay Payton was a solid player throughout his career, even before this contract. I remember he had one big year in Colorado, some nice years with the Mets in the early 2000s. But this deal just didn't make sense from the get-go. Payton was already in his mid-30s, and again, his stats aren't abysmal with the Orioles by any means. They just weren't worth what the Orioles offered him, and it was just kind of head-scratching from the beginning. They would even offer him that much money. Like, this could have been like a one-year deal for like $3 million, but instead you were paying him a little bit over $5 million a year to be, well, maybe the fourth best outfielder on the team. Similar to 2004, in 2010 the Orioles went on a spending spree, as this time they realized we got a good young core behind us, guys like Matt Wieters, Nolan Reimold, Brian Mattis. You know, it was time to, you know, build around that core, and of course they made some moves, and really none of them ended up working that I remember, and this one in particular, that being Mike Gonzalez signed to a 2-year, $12 million deal. He was supposed to be the Orioles' closer of the future, even though the Orioles didn't realize they already had an all-star closer on the roster by the name of Jim Johnson. Gonzalez was a complete bust in 2010 to where he lost his closing job, pitched sparingly in 2011, and then was cut by the Orioles shortly afterwards, just kind of making it a tumultuous 2 years. Like, there really wasn't anything spectacular about it. There wasn't really any reason for us to go, okay, maybe that first year was just a fluke and this second year is going to be better. Like, no, kind of got worse.
We just think Mike Gonzalez has really sucked here lately, and we love him. But we don't want anyone to know that we love him because he sucks.
Because the very next year, in 2011, the Orioles made the same mistake as the number 6 worst free agent signing for the Orioles since 1998, was signing Kevin Gregg to a 2-year deal worth $10 million. So Mike Gonzalez didn't work out. So let's go out and just get another closer, that being Kevin Gregg. And I mean, I don't know, at least Mike Gonzalez had some sort of success beforehand. Kevin Gregg was just a decent enough pitcher, not a fantastic closer. And with the Orioles, he really wasn't anything spectacular either. In his only full year as a closer in 2011, sure, he saved over 20 games, but he had an ERA of 4.37. And in 2012, even though the Orioles made the playoffs, Kevin Gregg had an ERA close to 5. He was waived and never pitched in the big leagues again after that.
So that was a fucking lie.
I think his big claim to fame, or at least the thing that people remember him most about his Oriole tenure, was in 2011 getting into that brawl with David Ortiz, because, I don't know, he threw at David Ortiz. David Ortiz got mad, and when he popped the ball up, he was telling David Ortiz to run it out, and Ortiz got fed up and swung at him, and all hell broke loose. But yeah, just not a good contract in general. Number 5, this one might be one that I don't know how many people are going to know the name of this guy, but it was kind of a disappointment. It was a letdown, as in 2005, the Orioles had another interesting offseason, mainly trading for Sammy Sosa being their big move that also didn't work out, but they knew they needed some sort of help, especially, you know, in the bullpen and in the rotation. So they decided to go after a bullpen arm by the name of Steve Kline for 2 years, $5.5 million. Now, you're probably wondering, who is Steve Kline? He was a pretty solid pitcher for the Cardinals early on, including 2004 with the 105-win pennant-winning Cardinals team having a 1.73 ERA for them. This seemed like a perfect match for the Orioles, getting that bullpen help that they needed, but things didn't necessarily go as planned, as Steve Kline would publicly bash the city of Baltimore and its fans, and his production on the field also didn't win him over either, as he would have a then career-high 4.28 ERA, would demand a trade to the San Francisco Giants, where he was just kind of mediocre from there on out. Like, I don't really know how much more I can explain it. Steve Kline was supposed to help the bullpen. He hurt him, and he didn't even really like being in Baltimore in the first place, expressing regret that maybe he should have just re-signed with the Cardinals because he had the most fun there, and it led to this disaster. At number 4, a deal that I thought would work out. Orioles signing Yovani Gallardo in 2016 to a 3-year contract worth $35 million. Now, the thing with Gallardo at this point in his career was his velocity was down, his strikeouts were down, but his ground ball rate was up, and he was still pitching very well as he helped the Texas Rangers make the playoffs in 2015 and even had some solid years with the Brewers early on. And I, for one, was excited about this too, because in 2016 the Orioles were definitely in need of rotation help. Sure, they had Chris Tillman still at the top of their rotation and a young Kevin Gausman really starting to come into his own, and heck, even Dylan Bundy would come out finally his rookie season and win 10 games, but it looked like the Ubaldo Jimenez contract was starting to turn bust. And so the Orioles thought getting a guy like Yovani Gallardo could definitely help. It could give them a solid number 2 starter behind Chris Tillman, and early on it looked like that, but things kept getting worse and worse, and then a stint on the injured list, and he would start 23 games for the Orioles, 6-8 with an ERA of 5.42, and wouldn't even play out the rest of that contract. After 1 year, he was cut by the O's, signed with the Mariners, played there a little bit, had an even worse time, and would never pitch in the majors again after that. So, yeah, I think maybe the declining velocity by Yovani Gallardo was more serious than we thought it was, but at the time we thought, okay, with where he's at in his career, being a ground ball pitcher, low velocity, this could work out in the Orioles' favor, and it didn't.
And he sends out a deep left center. Gallardo, Yovani Gallardo at the base of the wall. Here comes Reynolds, and he will score.
Number 3 and number 2 I'm lumping together because this happened in the same offseason and sort of similar to the Yovani Gallardo signing. The Orioles needed to make these moves, and they weren't bad in hindsight, but with the way they turned out, yeah, they were definitely bad. 2018 was the last year the Orioles were planning to contend under Buck Showalter and Dan Duquette, because they had Adam Jones, Manny Machado, Jonathan Scope, and even Zach Britton all coming up on expiring contracts. So they were going to splurge the money where it needed to be splurged. And, well, they needed rotation help because outside of Gausman and Bundy and even bringing back Tillman, they had at least 2 spots in that rotation that could, well, use the boost. So, the first one they decided to make was our number 3 pick, that being Andrew Cashner for 2 years and $16 million. Now, he had spent some time with Texas and Miami, and he's more well known for his time with the Padres, where he was a solid pitcher pretty much throughout his whole entire time, outside of maybe his short half-year stint with the Marlins. He was coming off a solid season with the Texas Rangers that garnered his payday, and a lot of people thought at 2 years, $16 million, the Orioles were getting a steal because they thought maybe Cashner would get paid more. But the Orioles weren't done there because our number 2 pick signed just a little bit later, that being Alex Cobb to a 4-year, $57 million contract. And this one made even more sense than the Cashner one because Alex Cobb had been a consistent starter for the Rays since about 2011, and sure, he did have an injury-plagued year in 2015 where he missed the whole entire year, and even in 2016 he came back strong in 2017 having a typical Alex Cobb year. So needless to say, Orioles fans were excited because their rotation looked like it could be mapped out for once in its life, but that turned out not to be the case because Cashner went 4-15 with a 5.29 ERA, and Alex Cobb went 5-15 with a 4.90 ERA. In 2019, things got worse for Cobb as he started 2 games and then was put on the injured list where he would not return that year. And even though Andrew Cashner had a solid 2019 as the Orioles ace, going 9-3 with a 3.83 ERA, they were in the rebuilding point now with all the superstars gone, meaning that by the trade deadline, Andrew Cashner was traded to the Red Sox, where he didn't do well, and after that has not pitched in the major leagues since. And Alex Cobb would come back in the COVID-shortened 2020 season, where he would pitch well, get traded to the Angels, where the Orioles would actually end up getting Kyle Bradish out of this deal, so it wasn't all bad. But I think the thing that irks Orioles fans about this is when Alex Cobb left, kind of resurrected his career because he was solid with the Angels, he was solid when he went to San Francisco and played for the Giants, but his Orioles tenure, he was 7-22 with a 5.10 ERA in about 2.5 seasons, one of them being injury-plagued, one of them he was traded, and in his only full season there, he was awful as well. So I don't know what didn't work out, but it looks like now, when you look at it, it just wasn't a good fit from the beginning, and the Orioles made that mistake. But there was one mistake that was worse than this, and this was during a time when the Orioles were kind of new to the whole winning thing, as in 2012 they made the playoffs, and in 2013, although they didn't make the playoffs, they finished with a winning record, meaning that after back-to-back winning seasons and a playoff appearance, in 2014, the Orioles were ready to go all in and make a push for the World Series. One of the signings they made was signing slugger Nelson Cruz to a one-year deal. That ended up working out. The only reason they signed him to a one-year deal was because he was part of that whole steroid thing, and, they wanted to make sure that he could be legit without the steroids, and while he led the major leagues with 40 homers that year. I think the only mistake the Orioles made with Cruz was not offering him a contract after that season, because when he signed that 4-year deal with Seattle, he showed that he still had it throughout those 4 years there. But the biggest move the Orioles made that offseason turned out to be their biggest mistake. Needing help in a rotation that did feature some nice young up-and-comers like Wei-Yin Chen and Miguel Gonzalez, and even, having Bud Norris in his first full year there, having a prospect in Kevin Gausman who was going to start getting some playing time very soon, and even their newfound ace, Chris Tillman. The Orioles felt like they still needed someone in there that could be that power pitcher, the guy who could put them over the top, and they decided to go and get Ubaldo Jimenez on a 4-year contract worth $50 million. Was it an overpay? Maybe. That's still up for debate, because Ubaldo Jimenez only had 2, maybe 3 really good seasons, as from 2008 to 2010 with Colorado, he was a solid pitcher for a team not known for pitching. Heck, he almost won the Cy Young in 2010, and after a down year in 2011 and 2012, and after getting traded to the Cleveland Indians, he would help them get back to the playoffs in 2013, going 13-9 with an ERA of 3.5. So when the Orioles signed him, he was kind of, on a high note, and Orioles fans definitely had hopes that this would work. Well, his first year with the Orioles, he went 6-9, had a 41 ERA, was demoted to the bullpen, and although he came back in 2015 and was decent, after that, things got worse. In 2016, he finished with an ERA of 5.44 and is more infamously known for giving up the walk-off home run in the wild card game to Edwin Encarnacion because Buck Showalter decided to put Jimenez in over Zach Britton, who had one of the most historic years for any closer ever.
There's a drive to deep left field, and the ball game is over.
And in the last year of his deal in 2017, well, we don't like to talk about that either because he had an ERA of 6.81, and after that, he never pitched in the majors again because, well, teams started to realize that he's done for. I mean, he went from one of the biggest free agent signings in Oriole history to one of the most hated names who really during that deal only had one decent season, being 2015 as I mentioned, where his ERA was 4.11, the lowest it was as an Oriole. It was the only year as an Oriole where he had a winning record and seemed like he was pitching as his old self. But the other 3 years were just disastrous, and considering they made the playoffs during 2 of those years, it would have really helped if Ubaldo Jimenez at least channeled his, not necessarily 2010 Colorado Rockies self, but maybe the 2008-2009 Ubaldo Jimenez, where the ERA was about 3.5, and he was pitching well, he was striking guys out. Even though we knew he was going to walk a lot of batters, that wasn't necessarily an issue because we knew that. You just kind of look back at it and go, maybe it just wasn't meant to be from the beginning. And to me, it's the worst contract in Orioles time since 1998 because it was supposed to help them get over the top, and really it just kind of, I don't want to say made them worse, but it definitely closed their window quicker than I think they wanted it to. So that is it for what I think are the 10 worst Orioles free agent signings since 1998. You can tell me in the comments below what are some that maybe I didn't mention during that time period that the Orioles made where you look back and go, why did we make that deal? Or maybe if there's some of you older viewers watching who maybe grew up, with the 80s and 90s Orioles, what are some free agent moves that you remember the Orioles making that you were like, this is going to work, and ended up not working out? You can even throw some trades in there, because I know some people would probably want to mention the Glenn Davis trade, and I do remember Dwight Evans in 1991. That one was kind of weird, but other than that, that's it for me. Stay safe out there, and until then, I will catch you all in the next one.